Good morning. I'm Rick Tarr. I'm the director of the NOC 80 Tech Transfer Office and the director of the Southern Maryland Tech Bridge. I have the pleasure to be here this morning with Commander Sam Chubbs Gray, who is the deputy director for Naval X. Thank you for taking time this morning to talk to us.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
So this morning we're going to be talking about innovation ecosystems, and in particular, I'd like to start off with Tech Bridge. That is a new initiative from Naval X, fairly new. And if you could start by saying, like, what is a Tech Bridge?
Yeah, absolutely. So Naval X was started in February of 2019 with the task of going out and really accelerating or scaling activities that were already going on in the Navy and Marine Corps, connecting into non-traditional partners in industry, connecting into our own internal workforce, and also academia. And, you know, we quickly realized as we did that one of the really important things was to get outside of the Beltway, get away from DC, and get
Right.
closer to those end users, right?
Yeah.
Like down where you are in Pax River is a great example. But, go out there and find out who is doing this really, really well, and how can we take those efforts and try to model it and scale it so that everyone in the Navy and Marine Corps, and then all the industry partners and academia partners, they all have access to something like a Tech Bridge. So the way I like to describe Tech Bridge is it's a platform, right? It's an open space, off base, low barrier of entry, someplace where you can go in and start collaborating with different groups together. We really modeled this after a couple different offices that we saw that were doing this. Kind of the biggest one that everybody knows is SoftWorks down in Tampa.
Sure.
Assistant Secretary of the Navy Hondo Gertz, he helped stand that up down in Tampa before he came up to be part of the Navy and Marine Corps. So that was a great model to go after. And one of the big things that we saw there was, by going off base and having this low barrier of entry facility, they gave access to companies and to academic institutions that didn't have a presence on base, that didn't have those connections in, and gave them the ability to talk with really three main parties. You have the end user, the sailor, marine, or the civilian workforce that's going to actually be using this tool. The contracting officers, the people that are actually going to be signing the checks that pay for these things. And then the great thing that we have in the Navy and Marine Corps is, our R&D folks, the people that work in the Naval Research and Development establishment, 36,000 people working in our labs and warfare centers and academic institutions. We really want to capitalize on that talent, but give them a place where they could connect with those other two groups, and then also reach out to the outside and get the companies and the academic institutions that wanted to do work with us. So we bring all of those together in a facility, in a space where people can start working on day one.
Awesome. So you talk about Naval Tech Bridges being a platform. What agreements or vehicles are you using to facilitate that partnership?
Yeah, so the biggest one we use is a partnership intermediary agreement, a PIA. And we found, particularly when we went down and talked with the other groups that were doing this, the SoftWorks, the AFWorks, and then the Navy Navy groups that were already doing this, like Crane, Indiana,
Sure.
and Orlando, Florida, both had, really strong connections in there. And PIAs kept coming up over and over again as a really, really powerful tool to allow us to do that. So Naval X operates under one PIA. We have several other PIAs at our various different tech bridges that they've signed. And that allows us to have a nonprofit partner that can go out and not be a performer, but an actual partner representing the government to a certain level to go out and talk with these other groups. And then inside the Navy and Marine Corps, we operate really on just sort of a value model of what do we give to the organization by having a tech bridge? What does that give them that they don't already have? So we don't traditionally sign MOUs with our Navy and Marine Corps partners, as our council likes to describe. An MOU between two Navy organizations, particularly when money isn't generally being transferred back and forth, is not really required. We're all on the same team. But if we do need it for various reasons, we can have that conversation. And we have signed a couple of MOUs between government offices to make sure that everybody understands the roles and responsibilities.
So when were the tech bridges launched, and where are they at? So how many do you currently have within the Naval X network, and when were they first launched?
Sure. So like I said, we started looking at this of February of 19, and then we went out and we scouted across the country to find what were those ecosystems we really wanted to tap into first. And so we started with 5 last September, and 2 of them fell into this category of groups that have been doing this for over 2 decades, really. And that was the uh, Naval Warfare Center, Crane,
Crane, right.
right, Crane, Indiana. Um, and then also NOC TSD, Naval
Right.
Air Warfare Training Center, Training and Simulation Division. I'm having trouble with my acronyms
No
today, but
worries. Yeah.
so Orlando and Crane both have been doing this for multiple years,
Right.
connected to two academic institutions. So in Crane, they were connected to the University of Indiana and also a little bit of Purdue, and then down in Orlando, they're connected to the Central Florida University. So they had access to a facility off base where they were doing these things. At the same time, when we started working with them, we became aware of an effort that was going on in the state of Rhode Island. That was actually not being led by an academic institution. It was being led by the state of Rhode Island through their Manufacturing Extension Partnership, their MEP, which they had actually brought together the Navy through ONR and the Undersea Warfare Center in Newport, as well as an academic institution with the University of Rhode Island. Eventually, they brought in Rhode Island School of Design. They brought in OTA Consortium and then a defense prime, all came in together to create a facility that's now open up in Rhode Island. It's about 3 miles outside of the gate of the Warfare Center where they can start to do early prototyping and collaboration. So we looked at those as kind of our three basic models and said, how can we do that? What it took 20 years in Crane and Orlando to do, how can we help accelerate what's going on in Newport and then try to scale that to other locations? So we said, where are the innovation pockets that we really want to tap into, as well as strong fleet support or warfare center support? We found San Diego, California through NAVWAR out there and the Naval Information Warfare Center Pacific. So we connected through them, as well as the University of UC San Diego, and then some other partners in San Diego to start that effort. Then up in Keyport, Washington, the Naval Undersea Warfare Center Keyport, as well as the Puget Sound Naval Shipyard, and then the tech community that we connect through because they're right across the sound from Seattle. So those are the first 5 that we started with, and that was September of last year. So we're coming up on a year. 2 months later, we added the Palmetto Tech Bridge down in
Right.
Charleston, South Carolina with Nywick Lant. And then just 2 months ago now, we added 6 more locations. So we added Hampton Roads, Pax River, where you're
Right.
from and you're the director of, which is the Southern Maryland
Maryland,
Tech
yep.
Bridge. We also added the Capital Region Tech Bridge, which is headquartered here with us at Naval X and represents all of the entities: Indian Head, Carter Rock, Dahlgren, McWill, a whole bunch of different offices all connect in to see how they want to collaborate and use this space. And then out on the West Coast, we added the Inland Empire Tech Bridge, which is out at Corona, California, the Ventura Tech Bridge, which is part of Point Mugu, Point Loma area. And then also up at the Naval Postgraduate School in Monterey is the the Coastal Tech Bridge.
Yeah. So you talked about it was intriguing, the Rhode Island model with the MEP and the state and the university. How important do you think that is for these collaboration platforms to really get going? Is that a critical part, or as you look at some of the other potential tech bridge sites that may not have as strong a relationship either with the state, or the state has several sites,
Sure.
And may not have a strong relationship with the university. So I don't know if you had any insights on the importance of those two factors for collaboration ecosystems.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a great question. It really, the way we look at tech bridges is they're a product of the ecosystem that they're in. And so
Right.
none of them are going to be exactly alike. You can't just photocopy it, write out a single SOP and say, this is exactly how you're going to do it. But the real value that we saw, particularly when we started bringing the groups together, is about last March when we started bringing kind of the larger group together. What myself and now the new director of the Tech Bridges, Whitney Tallarico, what we really noticed was most of the questions were being answered by the existing tech bridges, by the folks working in this space, we got a lot of times, the tech bridge directors would come to us and say, hey, we can't sign a PIA or we can't fund a PIA for reasons X, Y, and Z. Can you take this to Secretary Gertz and have him fix that? And before we would even start to answer that, one of the other tech bridges would pipe up and say, Well, no, we actually have done that, and this is where we got the authority from. And so 90% of the questions were being answered just by connecting it. And that's really a good example of, some of them would say, hey, we do have an academic partner, and that's core to
Hmm.
what we do. It's
Sure.
critical to our ecosystems. Where other places would say, well, because of where we are, we don't actually have a strong academic partner. We're going to go look. That's open up some new doors, but perhaps that's not something they need. And the MEP is a great example of that. In Rhode Island, the Manufacturing Extension Partnership, it focuses heavily on textiles and
Composites.
composites, right?
Right.
They're part of the Composite Alliance, but also heavily focused on the maritime industry because it is Rhode Island. So there's a natural partnership there.
Sure.
You're not going to get that same partnership at every single MEP. The program dates back to the 90s, and it's focused on the manufacturing of that state. And that's not always going to have a direct Navy or Marine Corps application. So it basically, you can kind of pick and choose which pieces are critical to you. Do
Right.
you need multiple PIAs? Can you go with a single one? Do you need multiple academic partners or none? And that's really how the tech bridges have built out.
So going back to your comment about the network and these tech bridges sort of helping each other from fostering innovation ecosystems, can you also talk about the value that the connection between the tech bridges from a technology perspective brings to the fight?
Yeah, absolutely. And this is something we recognized really early on from talking with the groups that were doing this well is, everybody has those connections, right?
Right.
But one of the real challenges, and this is something that Secretary Gertz brought to us, was, he would travel around to all these different warfare centers and he would meet the different cells that are doing great work. And that's what he really wanted to scale. But they all had different names, right? They all had some acronym. It usually had like a nautical flair to it. But they all were doing roughly the same thing. But that became a real challenge when you're trying to describe to somebody in Crane, what's going on in, Orlando, right? Because they're from two different syscoms, they're in different tech areas. So the language really mattered there. So if we could
Hmm.
simplify that, which we've tried to do quite a bit with, kind of our pipeline mapping and saying, hey, this is your prototyping phase, this is your, exploration phase, and helping people kind of understand that. But another interesting thing that came out was talking with a lot of the folks at the warfare centers is, 20 years ago, Keyport always likes to talk about how, 80% of their work was on torpedoes,
Right.
designing, manufacturing, upkeep, working on torpedoes. And for the most part, if you're working on torpedoes, you don't need to go to Pax River, Maryland and talk to you guys unless you're going to put it on an aircraft, right? That's
Right.
the end stage when it's all
H60,
built,
yeah.
right? But today, only 20% of Keyport's business is done around torpedoes. And the rest of it is being done on other technologies that we're seeing are spreading across and being used at the other warfare centers as well. So Keyport does a lot of work in AR/VR, for instance,
Right.
which is traditionally something that was only done down in Orlando through the training and simulation division. So by connecting those two groups, they get to find out, well, which startups, which small businesses are you working with, and what's the technology? Are you using the Unreal Engine? What is it that you're doing together? And that's just a lot of what we're seeing in technology in general. Is it's proliferating so fast. So much of it is driven by private industry, but it's being used across the board. Like everybody should be looking at digital twin, right?
Right.
This is
Right.
AI is the giant buzzword right now across DoD, but it's something that's going to affect every different platform, every different system. So if we can get people working together, it becomes much more powerful.
Awesome. Um, so a lot of the folks that are attending this session are from the Navy's R&D community, either at Pax River or other parts of NAVAIR. How can those folks leverage these innovation ecosystems? Like, what insights or encouragement would you have for them to say, hey, these are opportunities, and how can they leverage these
Yeah,
ecosystems?
absolutely. So Naval X has worked quite a bit on a couple different fronts in that regard. The first one is in training. So when we first started Naval X, one of our ideas was to create a thing called playbooks and something
Hmm.
that would live on Intellipedia. It's a Wikipedia-like format where we could have a living document we could update on whatever topic we wanted. And we started that with a playbook on Scrum. And we found a Navy 05. He had been an EOD commander. He
Right.
had implemented Scrum. His name's John Hasse. You can go read all about him. Um, and he had tremendous results. They were fantastic. So he helped us write a playbook. We published it. But what we found really quickly was that folks wanted more than just a document. Even if it was living, even if it had connections to the people who would help you, they wanted something that would really help them implement this. So kind of taking a page out of our own book and trying to learn fast and learn from our mistakes. So, okay, how do we need to adapt this? We came up with the Center for Adaptive Warfighting, which is a 5-day course. It's got 2 days on Agile Scrum, 2 days on Lean Startup, and a single day on human-centered design. We consider that sort of the bedrock training course, and that's available both on East Coast, West Coast. And in just a few short months, we've trained over 2,000 Marines, sailors, and civilian workforce, and hoping to continue to expand that. The other piece is we can use those same methodologies and then some of the things that we have here in-house at Naval X to help facilitate a new project. If you have something new that you want to try, whether that be a new effort within your PEO or within your program, or if you want to do a reorg of your office,
Right.
we can help kind of connect you to groups that do that.
Hmm.
Some of them are paid, some of them are already paid for. We can show you how those are, and then we can do some of that ourselves. And we've done that about a half dozen times now for various different PMWs and PEOs that have asked to help do this effort. But it all starts with a conversation. Just reach out and let us know, how much of this effort do you need us to help you with?
Right.
And then when does it go back to your office and how do you go forward with it? So we know what the lift is for your side, and the lift is for our side, and then really what funding is available if you need it going forward.
So thinking about outcomes, have you seen, if we were to follow a traditional model for an acquisition of a new technology, have you seen like bringing design thinking or some of the tools that the CA has um, to those problem sets, producing different outcomes?
Yeah, we have actually. So
Awesome.
really early on, we've started to see just identifying some early efforts where PEOs reached out and said, "Hey, this is something new we needed." A lot of them were centered around actually COVID. Really sped up a
Hmm.
lot of these efforts. Naval X itself was piloting, a couple different efforts for doing remote work. So it was really easy for us as COVID kind of launched, where we had some of the digital offices reaching out and we could share what we had learned there, and then also connect them with some of the performers that were either in really early OTAs or into an early SBIR, some of them from the other services actually.
Right.
And we identified one company through the Hacking for Defense program, which is funded through the Office of Naval Research. They've been involved in that very early on. It's now moved over to OSD and the National Security Innovation Network. But identifying a company that was going through the Hacking for Defense program, you know, connecting them with an Air Force SBIR and now a Navy funding pipeline so that we can bring that technology in and see that
Awesome.
making things that are
Yeah.
much more available. And COVID's really been a huge accelerant to a lot of our efforts as people realize just the power of working remotely and digitally and getting, frankly, a lot of things done in a short period of time.
So we've been talking about industry collaborations in these ecosystems, and I'd like to shift maybe to private capital
Sure.
and how private capital can help fuel some of the innovations coming out of those ecosystems. So what insights do you have about leveraging private capital? Where do you see private capital fitting into the tech bridges and innovation ecosystems in general?
Yeah, absolutely. And this is something that came out really early on as we were going around and we were building out the tech bridge model. I mean, remember, it's a platform.
Hmm.
We don't have our own funding vehicles. We don't have our own contracting officers. We leverage the existing structures that are already available through our academic institutions, our warfare centers, and our labs. So you think of like the SBIR program, the Office of Small Business programs, tech transfer where you come from,
Sure. Yeah.
and then also like our IP attorneys and all that existed, but we continuously got asked over and over again, how do we connect into, traditionally we're asked venture capital, how do we connect
Right.
to VCs and get into the pipelines that they're interested in? But when we did a little bit of exploration, we really looked at this was more than just venture capital. It was really looking at angel investors, venture capital, corporate venture capital, private equity, and institutional investors like family offices. And all of those have, their unique product, market segment that they're looking
Sure.
at, and they all operate on slightly different rules and how they like to focus things. But the real value to us as part of the Navy and Marine Corps is we're trying to take new technologies, new capabilities, and develop those and then scale those into something that we can rely on to be readily available when we need to contract for it and build it. And that's really where private capital excels. That is their entire business model at whatever stage you're talking about. Their goal is to increase the value of their company by making those companies grow and be more capable. So venture capital is one that everybody's kind of the most familiar with. But the general idea there is if we as a customer in the Navy and Marine Corps have a technology that we're interested in, we can invest very, very early on because we don't operate on a profit margin,
Right.
right? Our entire goal is capability based. So we will pay a pretty large premium. And as I described earlier, and as most people know who are listening to this, we also will help co-develop things. We can, even have different contracts that we can negotiate who gets the IP, who has rights to all the data that you're creating, particularly to be sold back to the government. But that's something that's not really available anywhere else in the market, is somebody who will
Right.
co-invest to develop that with you. So if we can properly connect into the venture capital and private equity community, we can really ensure that both sides understand when's the right time to be doing business with the government and when's the right time to be going out and expanding and having a commercial segment, because in the end, that's going to make it much more cost effective for us on the government side.
Absolutely. So, for folks that are listening to this and thinking, "Hey, I wonder if the technology that I'm working on is right for this type of collaboration with industry and with private equity in particular," what advice can you give them, or what should they be looking for to say, "Hey, I think this matches up with the type of factors that you're talking about"?
Yeah, absolutely. I think the biggest question to ask is, what is the commercial market?
Hmm.
And that's something that's really changed, where traditionally defense technology, it took a long time before it would go usually spin out of defense
Right.
into the commercial market. Now we're seeing a reverse, right? Where there's things out in the commercial market that are of great interest to us
Sure.
that we want to bring in, but understand what type of value we can bring to that customer. Traditionally in the Navy and Marine Corps, we've sat back and said, hey, the Navy's budget's $172 billion a year. We have the best technology. Like, we have to actually kind of take a different look on that. One of the best examples I can think of recently is in autonomy,
Hmm.
and LiDAR is a critical piece to autonomy. And there's a lot of uses that we would want for the Navy and Marine Corps, but understand where you fall. If you're talking to a startup who's a high growth company, they might not even be turning a profit yet, but they're getting a ton of investment because that market segment is so big. So think of a LiDAR camera, right? Just a
Sure.
small LiDAR, kind of cheap camera that you want to put. If you want to put 10 of those on every ship in the Navy, well, that's 3,000 cameras, right? That's not a lot, right? It's 3,000 cameras and then you're done. You'll have to replace a couple, but they're going to have to be, heavily, robust. They're going to have to be able to take salt water and work at, all these different conditions. Well, compare that to the auto industry, which is a huge market for anything autonomy. Well, if you're going to put 5 cameras on every car, there's 17 million cars sold a year in the US. That's 85 million potential LiDAR cameras compared to the 3,000
Right.
total in the Navy. That's just a much, much tougher market for us to basically break in and say, hey, we want you to stop what you're focused on, trying to grow and become this great LiDAR company. We want you to focus on our capability. But there are ways that we can use that to our advantage, right? Like,
Sure.
this is a really tough environment, and we are going to help you develop that together if that's what you want to do. So you can use that as sort of a stamp of approval. If this is something you're going to use in a really austere environment, you can say, hey, this is what they stick on, the bow of a Navy destroyer, right?
Right. Yeah.
Or on the periscope of a Navy submarine. Like, that's something that will then say, okay, well, that differentiates that company from the others. So you just have to have a much more transparent and realistic conversation. So if you're thinking in those ways, please reach out to us, and we're happy to have those conversations and help you understand, what is the actual value proposition that you're bringing to those companies, and why should they do business with us?
Are there some markets though that are hot right now? Obviously, I'm thinking of AI,
Yeah.
machine learning. Are there any others that are kind of areas where you've seen a lot of activity or interest within the private equity community?
Yeah, sure. So there's a couple ones. I think actually AI is a really interesting one, where for the past few years they've been heavily, heavily funded by private capital, mostly in the venture capital, arena, and then some of them going into scaling and getting up into private equity. Uh, but what we've also seen is it followed sort of a standard hype cycle. If you're familiar with
Sure.
that, if everybody gets all excited and says, all the money goes into it, and every they build all these big companies, but then reality starts to set in, and revenue actually hasn't been coming in very well for a lot of these AI companies. So you've seen sort of a small pivot from these, where they're opening up that government market. It goes back to what I was talking about, where um, we are willing to pay that premium for a capability because we don't need to turn a profit. So
Right.
because of that, a lot of these AI companies have started building up their federal segment, particularly their defense segment, looking, okay, maybe this is a way that we can get some revenue while we wait for the commercial market to come in. we've actually started to see something like that happening in quantum as well, where again, quantum is this
Mm,
massively difficult problem that takes a
sure.
ton of
Yeah.
resources. Um, and so that's another one where government starts to look like maybe the right entity to help kick this off and get it into, the point where then they can go start making more revenue on the outside. And then everybody's seen what's gone on in commercial space, with now commercial launches being viable. Um, so that's one where you've seen another one where that doesn't fit the traditional Silicon Valley venture capital, super high growth, high revenue, early stage, because space just requires so much infrastructure, the amount of investment that's required to get you there. But now they actually are starting to show those returns.
So you mentioned some of the factors that industry should consider when they're working with the Navy. What are some of the other things that or advice you'd have for industry when they're thinking about engaging the Navy, either through one of these innovation ecosystems or tech bridges, or even private equity? What
Yeah.
insights? Because we're a unique customer. I think you alluded to it
Yep.
earlier. So yeah, what insights would you have?
Yeah, so I think the biggest one when you're going into one of these sort of collaborative environments and starting the conversation is don't look at it like there's a giant pile of money just
Right.
waiting, because it is. I mean, it is a huge amount of money that the Navy and Marine Corps spends. But when you get down to it, each program needs to be very careful about how they're allocating their funds. Um, and I think there's a misperception that government just throws money around. And so everybody needs to be very kind of transparent, particularly when it's a new effort, where it's something where you're working with a startup, so a company that doesn't have revenue, a company that's trying to grow very rapidly. Don't oversell what the government can provide financing wise, funding wise,
Right.
but have a very transparent conversation about what that timeline looks like, how much money your program actually has to allocate to this, and then let both sides kind of make a decision whether that's right to make that, is this something that you both want to go into? Because eventually for startups, it's really about time. How
Sure.
much energy do they have to put into getting this, prototyping OTA, which might be lowish dollars,
Hmm.
even an SBIR phase 2, which, can be up to just shy of $1.6 million. Like that's a decent amount of money, but how, what is the lift and what does that get you long term, so that everybody's kind of making those decisions with a true understanding of what you're getting into.
Right, and I think that's been a theme as we've talked. Transparency on both sides about
Absolutely.
what the opportunity is for industry, what the expectations are from the government in terms of a successful outcome or what transition might look like.
Right. And that's really what we've used the platform of Naval X quite a bit for. Pre-COVID, we did a lot of in-person meetings, and now we're doing much, much more virtually through podcasts and through various other kind of online mechanisms, but really making it available for anybody that wants to come learn about these programs and to ask those questions. And that's one where we actually learn a lot from just having these conversations, where we
Sure.
expect to just be putting out information. Well, it's always a dialogue. We always hear back. And a great example of that is, you know, t- connecting the SBIR program, the Department of the Navy's SBIR program, with the venture capital community,
Hmm.
saying like, why don't you do more work with us? And there is SBIR is actually run by the Small Business Administration. They put a lot of the rules in place, and they do actually have rules against multiple venture-backed companies going into the pipeline. You can get a waiver for it. But what we learned from having those two-way conversations was that particularly the VCs themselves were not pushing this, because it was just one more hurdles, one more thing to like, well, okay, we might get this. We put in all this effort. We might get $1.6 million, but then we have to get a waiver. It's just one more thing for them to kind of think about. Well, because we're having those conversations and finding out that that really mattered to them, the Don SBIR office was able to put in a blanket waiver up to 15% of our portfolio for venture-backed companies. And that would only happen 6-7 weeks ago. And we already actually have the first companies entering into the SBIR portfolio for the Navy off of that system, where no waiver required. It's already agreed upon. If you're awarded the SBIR, you just go forward. All the requirements fall on the Navy side of that. And we've seen the VCs really like to see that. And then it also helps the small companies.
No, that's awesome. And I think that goes in line with just Naval X reducing barriers in general,
Right.
barriers to interacting, having a place outside the fence line, barriers for private equity to come in and partner with us. And No, that's awesome. Well, thank you for the time this morning.
Yeah, thanks for having me. This is great.
Yeah, and we look forward to your questions. Thanks.
Awesome.